Because Roger is already building a party, Tara wants to build a party. And building on your experience in Venezuela, you talked about building dignity rather than building parties. Would you say they're doing the right thing, or would you say they should do something else rather than building new parties?
That I think it's an important lesson to see the NDP win and then disillusion people. I think that's an important lesson that people have to learn, just as, I think some people are learning in the U.S. with Obama's victory, with Obama's government. You have to do that. You have to go through that experience to break the illusion, because if the other side wins, then you maintain the illusion that if only in the next election the NDP can win, things will be different. They won't. But the point is, people have that illusion. That's why I think, if the NDP had won, we would now be in a different stage of building, an alternative.
And maybe also adding something about the United Socialist Party, or whatever it was is called now in Venezuela, and whether there's something to learn from that, either in ways of how to do it or possibly also how not to do it.
Well, as far as the Venezuelan case, there is a party, in Venezuela, which is called the PSUV, or the United Socialist Party of Venezuela. It is a party which is composed of many factions. And when Chavez first, sort of called for that kind of party, he said, "We want a party in which you won't recognize any of the leaders, any of the people. This will new people from below will become the new leaders." Well, that certainly wasn't true, because in fact the old, well-organized people at the top had the networks, and they were able to maintain themselves. And Chavez, who wanted always, and impatience is always a real problem, who always wanted to accomplish things quickly, turned to those people who could accomplish things quickly. Right now, in that party, there are what I've described three factions. Now, certainly if you look at Venezuela, the first enemy is imperialism and the capitalist oligarchy, etc. But within the party, there are three factions, effectively. One is those people who say, we've gone far enough. Let's get off the bus. My family now has riches, in various offshore accounts, et cetera, like that. We have all these, sort of front men who are controlling various capitalist firms, et cetera. Like that is a very important faction. It's, we don't want to go any further. Another faction is a group of people who are not opposed, and this is a faction that's just not opposed to capitalism, it's pro-capitalist. There's another faction which is definitely not pro-capitalist, but it is, and wants to build socialism, but entirely from above. And their whole focus is, we, can make the decisions from above that will lead us to socialism. It's a vanguardist perspective. Many of those people involved look to Cuba as a model, and they say, look, they don't have workers controlled in Cuba, why should we be talking about it here? That kind of question. And they are very well entrenched in the oil industry and several other industries. And then there's the movement from below. And that is I was interviewed in a Croatian newspaper right before the election. They asked me, what's going to happen after the election? I said, the class struggle is going to decide what's going to happen. And that has been continuing to happen in Venezuela. To give you one example, just one example of the kind of struggle that's been occurring, is there was a Ministry of Communes. The Ministry of Communes had the responsibility of organizing this process of taking the individual communal councils and bringing them together as communes, which 10, 15, 20 communes, to work on larger questions which are beyond the scope of a neighborhood. Now, the Ministry of Communes people and the Minister of Communes had been trained as a social worker in the social worker program in Cuba. They were completely top down as to what would be a legitimate commune, etc. So there was a movement then of initially 18 communes from below which refused to cooperate in any way with the Ministry of Communes and began to build a movement entirely themselves. And they began to organize. At one point, in fact, in October and November, Chavez said at one of his open public cabinet meetings, where are the communes? What's happening with the communes? Why don't we hear them being actors in this whole process? Maybe we shouldn't have a Ministry of Communes. Maybe we should have, every ministry should be involved in working with the communes, because they're not functioning the way they should. Well, a friend of ours, wrote immediately to Aparea, which is the sort of the left bulletin board, saying, open letter to Comrade Chavez. If you want to know where the communes are, ask the people. Don't ask your party. Don't ask the mayors and the governors. Don't ask these people, etc. Like, come to the communes, because we now started with 18. We now have 80. We are now building a whole and alternative movement to what you've been doing and what's been happening in the Ministry of Communes. Well, it was fantastic because it got everyone read, and it was a real challenge to the whole structure and movement. Now, one of the most interesting things and most sort of encouraging things that has occurred since Chavez's death, with the appointment with the new president, Nicolas Maduro, is that he appointed as the new Minister of Communes someone closely linked to the commune movement from below. And that process of the development of the communes from below has been developing very substantially. But there's class struggle happening in this whole process, and one has to understand that. And how it turns out, you don't know. Class struggle is not dictated. The results are not dictated.
Do you think Marxism is something that we can draw upon to build a new movement, a new socialist project? And if so, what kind of, there's as many Marxisms as there are Marxists. What kind of Marxism do you think we should draw upon or develop to build a new movement?
I don't see rebuilding the left immediately on the basis of a Marxist party. But I think we can rebuild the left on the basis of a broad left party that breaks with neoliberalism and opens the door to moving beyond neoliberalism, beyond capitalism, to a new system. And hopefully that could be the eco-socialist project. Now, I think what is important to do, especially at this stage, especially now in the 21st century, is develop the conditions, develop the audience for Marxist and left socialists to be able to refine their analytical tools, their theories, their strategies, and especially their practice. I was very influenced when I was younger, and I reread again a French philosopher called Henri Lefebvre. What's very interesting with Henri Lefebvre is that he maintained, since the 60s and up to his practically up to his death, that Marx's approach on the state was not a classical statist approach. He maintained till his death that Marx actually synthesized the anarchist view of going beyond the state to a classless society, but he synthesized it with seizing power in order to eventually abolish the state. And I think it's an interesting proposal, and it's a key proposal in rebuilding a new Marxism. How can you develop the practical means by which you seize state power, but you slowly but surely abolish that very same state power? Now, what's interesting in reading Michael's work and his take on what is happening in Venezuela is that he posits developing the commune model and developing the protagonistic model, involving people in self-management, worker self-management, and the communes as a practical way in which you abolish the existing state and establish the conditions for a different kind. Whether you call it a state or not, he's willing to entertain the discussion, but a different way of running and ruling society. And I think that has to be the key around which we organize the rebirth of the left and the rebirth eventually of Marxism. That's why I think when we drafted the basis of unity of our eco-socialist network, we insisted so much on the criticism of real socialism and the errors of the 20th century, and opened it to a vision of socialism which encompasses worker self-management, participatory democracy, participatory budgets, and what Michael calls, and I guess the Latin American left called, protagonistic democracy.
Do you have any ideas how we engage those people of whom we think they could benefit from socialism, but who we don't know how to talk to, who don't know of our existence? How do we get out of our isolation in building a socialism? Because if it's about to be democratic, either it's all the people. If it's only a few group of people talking about participation, well, where are the participants? I don't know who wants to answer that question. Maybe it's the toughest one that whoever wants to goes first.
Well, I mean, I don't want to come back to some things I said, but this is where building a left alternative that runs an election can help. And I'll give you a concrete example drawn from the history of Quebec Solidaire. Before we formed Quebec Solidaire, there was a tremendous amount of discussion in the left in Quebec from 1996 till 2006 on whether it was necessary or not to build a party and establish a clear rupture with the Parti Québécois. What we did in 2001 is, even though that debate had not really matured within the left, is decide to run a left candidate on a left unity basis in one riding in a by-election in Montreal. What was interesting is we had the Communist Party, the Fourth International Section, and a bunch of non-affiliated activists come together to support that left-wing candidate, and also a section of labor. Now, we were amazed because we didn't think that in 2001 in Quebec there would be a section of labor that would be courageous enough to openly break with the Parti Québécois and support a candidate running in one riding in Montreal that seemed such a quixotic thing. You know, it's Don Quixote all over again. But it did, and that candidate got 25% of the vote in that particular riding. A year after that, we formed the Union of Progressive Forces in Quebec, 2002, and by 2006, we formed Quebec Solidaire. So at a point in time, being able to run in elections does two things. First, it tells to the splintered left, one of the groups that you mentioned, that, look, you're not going to solve the great historic discussion of Stalin, Trotsky, Che Guevara, Fidel Castro for the next decade or so. So please, let's look outside and talk about real strategic issues of how you bring your message to the people, one. Two, try and get people from the mass movements involved in what you're doing. Bring in the trade unions, bring in new activists, and try and formulate a program that people actually that have never been organized in the movement can support. And doing that work kind of forces you to change focus and look outside rather than inside. So at one point, being able to do that kind of forces you to look outside and then start asking very hard questions about where you're at in building the movement. So it is useful to do that, but you have to do it well, and you have to do it knowing the limitations of it. But it's part and parcel of what I think not only Michael has talked about, but his partner Martha Harnecker talked about, the importance of defining left and the radical left, not necessarily by the spectacular action that you do, but rather by an action that will bring in the broad sectors of society in a path, in a process that will get them to break with the system.
We first of all have to start with what people are concerned about, what they're struggling over. That is the necessary starting point, as opposed to sitting back in a room and deciding what the next theoretical stage is. While working in this, where people's consciousness is, on, say, an anti-neoliberal, you have to bring the concept of a socialist vision and incorporate that at the same time. That you can't, simply say, we'll expunge all discussion of socialism because that might scare people. Rather, you have to say, this is how this relates to our vision, at every stage of the thing. And one of the lines that I keep using over and over again, which is, if you don't know where you're going to want to go, no road will take you there. And that's, I think, absolutely key. You have to be able to say, we're not going to postpone X, Y, and Z, until a later point. We have to show how X, Y, and Z fit into our vision of the future.
And so the issue is not finding people, not talking to them, not even getting into hard discussions about, capitalism versus an alternative. I think the issue we face right now is an organizational one, because you talk to them and then it's like, okay, where do you come and how do we collectively decide what to do? And that's the big issue, I think, that we need to really look at, because if we don't have a place to be deciding on action together, where we have the discussions, where we, where we learn from each other, where we analyze our mistakes, where we do all those things, where we have the debates about, history and the left and everything, then it will crash like it did in 2001, and that's what we want to avoid. And so the organizational question, I think, is the key one. People are ready to join. They just need to know what to join.
You asked about a forum. Where is that forum? And I'd like to announce that now polling.ca as a cyber forum where people can go and put their own initiatives and vote about social issues. And I wanted to ask the panel here whether they thought that we need to change from representative democracy, where we give our power to politicians or one party or another party, and to direct democracy, which is people legislating their own rules. I don't know if people are ready for it, or maybe it'll take another century.